I'd like to welcome everybody to our September 11th, 180th episode of the Minnesota Outdoor Skills and Stewardship Series series of webinars. I appreciate you joining us today. We got a great topic talking about wildlife and aquatic management areas across the state, and I harp on this all the time. We have fantastic opportunities to get outdoors and access public land across the state of Minnesota. So today, Jamie and Jamison are going to join us and cover a little bit of wildlife operations and WMAs and the aquatic WMAs. No, aquatic management areas. I get that acronym right yet. And I think we'll turn it over to Jamie. You're going first, right?
That's right. I'm going first. You can hear me okay?
Sound great.
All right. Well, welcome everyone. Thanks for showing up today on this gorgeous day in September. I'm Jamie Gangware. I'm the Wildlife Operations Manager for the section of wildlife that's within the Division of Fish and Wildlife. And I cover statewide operations, so day to day, including, anything you name it under the sun, but statewide policy and planning for wildlife management areas falls under my belt. I have been with the DNR for a little over 20 years. I've been in this position for a little over 2, and I'm excited to share my passion about wildlife management areas today. So wildlife management areas. So what is the purpose of a wildlife management area? They were established to protect those lands and waters that have a high potential for wildlife production. This is per the legislation, so I'm going to read verbatim, that have a high potential for wildlife production, and to develop and manage these lands for wildlife production, public hunting, public trapping, public fishing, and other compatible recreational uses. And that's Minnesota Statute 86A.05 subdivision 8. And we'll get into other compatible uses, but briefly, hiking, canoeing, kayaking, wildlife viewing is a big one. So the history of the current WMA system, it was started in 1951, and back then it was called the Save the Wetlands Program. The state established it in response to alarming loss of wildlife habitat across the state. The program at that time was focused on purchasing wetlands from willing sellers, and a handful of visionary WMA managers initiated this program, which evolved into the present-day WMA system that we have today. So the original goal of the Save the Wetlands program was to acquire 200,000 acres of wetland and their surrounding uplands. But over time, this goal has changed to reflect additional habitat loss, so including non-wetland associated prairies, grasslands, and forests. And to reflect the population growth and in the increasing demand for recreational opportunities. And with over 70 years of support from conservationists, from hunters, and the legislature, and the passing of the Clean Water Land Legacy Amendment, the public has access now to over 1.4 million acres within the 1,500 WMAs that we have within the state. And this makes Minnesota's WMA system one of the most well-developed and largest in the country, and I would argue one of the best, but I might be biased. So how are WMAs used? So hundreds of thousands of hunters utilize these lands every fall, hunting all game species. So pheasants, waterfowl, deer, grouse, bear, turkey, you name it. And hunting seasons, they roughly run from September through January. So that allows for other compatible uses during the remainder of the year. And while 15% of Minnesotans hunt, 52% of residents watch wildlife, which is the highest participation rate in the country. And hunting and wildlife watching are a $1 billion industry in Minnesota. So compatible uses here on WMAs means anything that does not interfere with that core function of a WMA, which, to circle back, is the protection of lands and waters with a high potential for wildlife production. So uses that would compromise wildlife nesting or brood rearing or would stress young or nursing animals are prohibited. So this can range from motorized vehicle use within a WMA to having dogs off leash during the nesting season. WMAs are generally lacking in infrastructure, meaning they're not staffed. There are parking opportunities on the periphery of each unit, but they're not developed. There are not developed or maintained trails, like there's no paved trails. There are no restroom facilities. Water access sites may be limited to just carry in like canoe, kayak, with like a mud or dirt base, sometimes gravel. Of course, there are exceptions to this depending on where you're at in the state, the size of the WMA, and neighboring land uses. But these lands are meant to be for the production of wildlife. So roads, pit toilets, offices, paved trails are not compatible with those goals. So those are things you would not find on a WMA. Funding for WMAs comes from a variety of sources. So you can see here hunting license fees. That funds a lot of the work that we accomplish on WMAs. Hunting stamps also. The Outdoor Heritage Fund, which is 1/3 of the Clean Water, Land, and Legacy Amendment. State and federal bonding funds, reinvest in Minnesota those critical habitat license plate dollars, donations that get matched through that reinvest in Minnesota program. Environmental and Natural Resources Trust Fund is the lottery sales tax. We do receive land and money donations from individuals and organizations. And then we are always pursuing federal, state, or local grants when they are available. Yeah, I think we're good enough there. Sorry. So when we talk about WMA habitat or WMA development and management, we can parcel that out into a few different topics. So habitat development and management is the cornerstone of the work that we do to meet that core function of a WMA, again, wildlife production. So when a new WMA is brought online, area wildlife managers will determine the most suitable habitat that needs to be restored or enhanced, and taking into account current conditions, what ecoregion, what the landscape level planning is for that site. So whether it's a full restoration or just an enhancement, the goal is what is most beneficial for the wildlife in that area. And it's all balanced based on wildlife needs and the native habitats that are there. And managers use tools such as prescribed fire, brush grinding, mowing of invasives, so many other techniques to manage habitats. Wetlands are restored and managed to provide a mix of shallow and open water habitats for wildlife. And wildlife doesn't just include game species, it includes all species of wildlife. And wetlands and grasslands have also been shown to support climate resiliency by sequestering carbon out of the atmosphere, and forested habitats support climate resiliency when we vary our species and age structure versus having a single species and age classes of trees on the landscape. And so I just threw a bunch of fun pictures, tools of the trade, and in that, starting in the lower left-hand corner, you can see we've got a prescribed fire going on, and then right above that, we're doing some brush grinding on a site that's a little bit wetter, so we couldn't get in there and burn. So this was let's try this as an alternate. In the middle, you can see those trees. We've got varying species and age classes. Upper right is a machine we call the Swamp Devil, and it helps to break up floating cattail bogs that can clog waterways and cause water level issues and maintenance issues. And then in the lower right, we've got a tractor pulling a seed drill, planting native prairie. And then bottom middle, we've got some varying age class there of helping us to plant trees on a new WMA. And access and boundary development and management. We're not always doing the flashy and fun stuff, but this is just as important, and in some cases, I would argue maybe even more important, is creating and maintaining access for all users. So developing new parking lots, access roads, even putting a floating boardwalk through some sensitive areas, maintaining all of this infrastructure is a large amount of the time that our area wildlife staff spend throughout the year. We've got over 3,000 parking lots on those 1,500 WMAs and over 700 miles of road. So it's a heavy lift for our staff to maintain this access and our boundary. So surveying is really critical, posting the boundary on our new WMAs and maintaining those existing WMA boundaries. That's another continuous work item for staff. We have internal to DNR survey crews that help us reestablish lines where maybe it's become a little fuzzy, and then we are out there as pounding in posts no matter the weather. So being a good neighbor is really important to the DNR and extremely important for WMAs and AMAs. You know, we want to prevent trespass from public land onto private land, and then as well prevent trespass from private land back onto public land, and maintaining those boundaries is the first step in doing that, and it all starts with those pretty yellow signs. And partnerships is an incredible part of development and management of our WMAs. WMA does not just come into being or remain part of the greatest public land system in the country just in a day. It takes a lot of effort from a lot of folks. You know, it can start with our willing sellers and a ribbon cutting ceremony to posting those signs and planting the prairie or planting those trees, to just the continual maintenance of filling potholes after flood events. But WMAs are blessed with a support system like none other. And that's evidenced here in these just two examples of signs from some recent acquisitions. And you can see how many partners came together to make it happen. That's the passion that we are blessed with within the WMA system. And if you would like to get involved and be part of that passion, we have an Adopt-a-WMA program. So the Adopt-a-WMA program was established by the legislature back in 2011. And the intent was to encourage, this is straight from legislation as well, encourage and recognize citizens and local conservation groups to assist with maintenance of WMAs. So we have informal agreements, so it's much like a volunteer agreement, and it's specific services covered to specific WMAs for a specific period of time. They're very flexible, they're very easy, and these needs are driven by not only the ability or interest of the individuals or groups, but also the desire to be involved, but also the need of the WMA. So this program starts with coordination at the local level. So contacting the local area wildlife manager is the first step to adopting a WMA, and you could get a cool sign at the WMA. So how do you find them? Well, they're everywhere except Ramsey County. So WMAs are present in 86 of Minnesota's 87 counties. You can use the QR code that's here. You can just scan that with your phone. You should be able to do it right on the screen. Or you can go to the short code up above that mndnr.gov /WMAs. And you'll get to the WMA landing page. And if you scroll toward the bottom, you'll get to our Find a WMA. And that's the first of the images that you see on your screen. You can filter by county if you're interested in just seeing what counties are there or what WMAs are within your county or local to you. And then you can virtually explore that WMA. So each WMA has its own page with information that includes the nearest town, directions to it, how big it is, a general description, and the game species that are found there. And so that's that inset, the bottom image. And if you keep scrolling, because you'll end up with a long page, and it was too much for me to put here as an image, you'll get down to a contact us box, and that has the phone number direct to the local wildlife office that manages that WMA. And additionally, which you can see here in the lower right, there's a map of the WMA. So you've got two options for maps. You can look at it like you're looking at it now with these color blocks, but you could also click on the aerial imagery, that the smaller box in the lower left-hand corner of the map, and look at the aerial imagery of that WMA. You can expand this map, and then you can also click in that green box that says show land cover. So it'll show these polygons that are different colors, and you can click on it. Everything in this map is clickable, by the way. So you can get township range and section, you get lat longs so that you can navigate to a specific point within the WMA if that's how you like to do it. It'll show the conservation officer that covers this WMA, but it'll also give you the land cover if you turn on that land cover layer, and it'll give you a general and a specific cover type. So you can either get upland deciduous trees, meaning like a dry forest, or you can get aspen, birch, forest, northern hardwood subtype. I clicked on that and that's what it's telling me. So you can get pretty highly specific information about each WMA. There are some major updates coming to these pages over the next few months, and so we'll be adding all the parking lots, and so you'll be able to see those displayed. Access points, hunter walking trails will be added. So everything will be getting a nice little facelift, but the links will remain the same, and the general functionality remains the same. And finally, another way to get involved is the Conservation Partners Legacy Grant Program. I know that David Stein, who's the coordinator, was here at a MOS webinar not that long ago. And so just to reiterate, you know, our offices work really closely with partners to get awarded these grants, and they're eligible for conservation projects on public lands or lands under permanent conservation easement. So WMAs are eligible land types. All nonprofit organizations are eligible, including government organizations. And you just start working with the Area Wildlife Office if you're interested in getting some funding and learning more about the CPL grant program. So I'm going to kick it back to Jameson, or over to Jameson.
Thanks, Jamie. Yeah, I'm Jameson Wendell. I'm the Fisheries Habitat Manager with the DNR. I'm based out of St. Paul. I've worked for Minnesota DNR for almost 10 years now. Worked in Detroit Lakes for a while as a Red River fishery specialist, and I've worked out of St. Paul for about 5 years. A lot of what Jamie talked about applies to aquatic management areas as well. You simply replace the W with the A for a WMA versus AMA, but there are some subtle differences as well that I will talk about. Jamie had just talked about CPL. I will mention right away that AMAs are also eligible for CPL grants. So if your partners are actively engaged in a certain area and see a need for a restoration or enhancement project, say on an AMA, please contact area fisheries supervisor, and we will kind of show how to get to those contacts as well here. So similar to what Jamie talked about, Minnesota Statute 86A.05 Subdivision 4, AMAs were established to protect, develop, and manage lakes, rivers, streams, and adjacent wetlands and lands that are critical for fish and other aquatic life. So obviously, the water quality is a key component to protection of these lands. And that's also for the intrinsic biological value, as well with public recreation access, so public fishing, and once again, other compatible outdoor recreational uses. So with many of these lands, when we're making management decisions, we're kind of balancing a lot of times, you know, what kind of recreational access can be provided while not impacting, you know, the habitat value, the benefits of the habitat that are being provided. Now, the picture of this AMA, I will say, not all of our AMAs look like this. This is a rather exceptional one, but they are obviously very available for public viewing, public walking, you know, wildlife viewing, anything like that, especially, you know, very scenic AMAs such as this one. So a little bit on the AMA history. Outdoor Recreation Act in 1975 was part of Minnesota Statute 86A, which we referenced before. Originally, AMAs were not listed as a resource unit in this original act. Historically, most lands that were acquired by fisheries were for very specific purposes, say for primarily fish production, the hatchery, or the state purchased a number of areas known as northern pike spawning areas back in the day when spawning of northern pike was seen as pretty limited and there wasn't a lot of successful reproduction going on. So many of these areas were acquired and protected and often managed, manipulating water levels and other activities specifically for the purpose of northern pike spawning. There were also many rough fish barriers purchased, so areas with the intent and goal of keeping rough fish at the time, referred to as rough fish, but you know, specifically looking at common carp, an invasive species in Minnesota, and also fish traps to congregate those fish to make them for removal opportunities. Also drainable ponds. We also have many of our hatcheries are on grounds that were purchased and classified as originally considered fish management areas. Over time, many of those have often evolved as well into area offices. So unlike when Jamie is talking about WMAs and there's very little infrastructure, we have some AMAs that actually have, say, a public boat launch with a parking lot and a concrete ramp, or there may be an area fisheries office or an area office for fisheries and other wildlife, forestry, other staff as well in those offices, and those are on lands that are classified now as AMAs. In 1993, the ability to create and purchase AMAs was authorized by an amendment to that 1975 Act. And this was later also amended to state that fisheries properties acquired before August 2000 were all going to be designated as AMAs now. So this creates a little bit of complexity in how we manage some of these properties, because we have many properties that are similar to WMAs. They may be remote, they may have very little infrastructure on them, roads or trails or things like that. But then we also have some properties where we may have an area office building or a hatchery building or things like that on them. So how do we manage those diverse properties? AMA locations are across the state, typically located at the interface between land and water. So if there's typically some sort of a water connection to these properties. Across the state, we have over 700 AMAs and over 770 shoreland miles. We are missing more than just Ramsey County. We have AMAs in 73 of Minnesota's 87 counties. In the middle part of the state, Cass, Becker, Crow Wing counties have the most miles of AMA shorelands. And then also unique to our AMA program, we also have a large number of easements. So we have trout stream easements that are concentrated in some of the counties known as trout counties, areas of the state. So in southeast Minnesota, northeast Minnesota in particular. So say, for example, Fillmore and St. Louis counties, we have a large number of trout stream easements. And these easements are held, they're still owned privately, but they have been purchased. The state has purchased rights to allow access on these easements and often to protect conservation value. We did have Dustin Hoffman, one of our stream habitat specialists, gave a Moss webinar, I think last year. So I think that is referenced in this as well to learn a lot more about trout stream easements in that webinar. So AMA use, permissible uses, it varies once again on a number of factors determined by, we have a lot of smaller AMAs than say with WMAs. Many of these have smaller footprints, they're protecting very targeted specific areas. We also have many AMAs that are relatively larger size. So that depends on what we consider permissible uses. And we also factor in the proximity of residences. Many of our AMAs are in very urban areas and may be relatively small, so we may not be able to allow things such as hunting or trapping on those. So those are the factors that may relate to the compatibility of things such as specifically hunting and trapping. So on AMAs, what we consider permissible use falls into three different categories. We have our general use AMA, which is very similar to a WMA, where there's angling, non-motorized travel, wildlife observation, hunting and trapping, all open to the public on those general use AMAs. This is often our larger, relatively larger AMAs in rural settings. We also have restricted use AMAs where we can allow angling, non-motorized travel, and wildlife observation. These may be, say, next to a hatchery or an area office building, or just in a rural, or just in an urban setting where hunting and trapping would not be safe, would not be a permissible activity. And then also with our easements, oftentimes angling is the only activity allowed on almost all of our easements, in fact, where you are allowed to walk through that riparian corridor, say along a trout stream, but the intent is that you would need to be walking through that corridor to gain access to fish a stream, say a trout stream, for example. So in those easements, then we do not, other activities such as wildlife observation would not be allowed within those easement corridors, since it is still property held privately, and we have, the state has purchased specific rights for access on those easements. So a little bit on AMA management. Our primary goal, again, is to protect that intact shoreland and riparian habitats, while also providing reasonable access to the public. We're looking to maintain the conditions of these very valuable properties. So native plant establishment, terrestrial invasive species are often a concern on many of these, and we also address eroding shorelines at times. And many of our easements also provide management access to the stream for activities such as a stream restoration or habitat improvement in the stream along that area. So as far as access for his management, we do a lot of different things: facility upgrades, boundary surveys, as Jamie had mentioned before. Oftentimes these areas have, are not actively managed, so there's not an office on many of these areas. So it is, not a lot of eyeballs on these sites. So there may be some dumping that goes on. People not either, maybe not be aware that it is a state property. So we need to make sure we remove those, any dumping that may have occurred of different refuse. Or an example here, looks like some tires and other things that were dumped on a AMA. And also, similar to WMAs, we develop parking lot areas on many of our AMAs as well, to safely park and access an AMA similar to a WMA. For habitat, one of the invasive species is one of our main activities for habitat management. Many of these areas are on sort of that transitional areas between uplands and aquatic resources. So many of these invasive species, buckthorn is very common on many of these AMAs. So as an active management is trying to address those invasive species that may be impacting some of the native habitat in those areas. Similar to what Jamie had talked about, prairie reconstruction and enhancement, we do that on many of our AMAs as well. Oftentimes our AMAs are a little bit smaller than many of the WMAs, so we may take a little bit different strategy, and maybe prescribed burn is not as reasonable on some of these smaller units, smaller parcels than what we see at a larger area. So we take a little bit different strategy in how we implement those management goals. But the goals are very similar between the two different programs, between WMAs and AMAs. Similar to AMA funding, state bonds, game and fish fund, the legacy amendment has been a huge boon to AMAs as well. The Sard Sam's Outdoor Heritage Fund funds many of the habitat projects, as well as the acquisition of many of these properties throughout the state as well. In addition to the Environmental Natural Resources Trust funds. Also, land and money donated by many conservation groups and individuals as well, donated to the state to be used as an AMA. Similar to how to find an AMA, similar to what Jamie talked about, mndnr.gov/AMAs instead of WMAs. You can also go to a Recreation Compass and find these properties as well. At the bottom of the page, you can click on Find an AMA, and similar structure to what Jamie showed before. You can search by county, you can search by use type, and it'll bring up a variety of different search features you can search for as well by name. The one I brought up here to show is one in a more urban area. That's an Eagle Creek AMA. It's either right adjacent to, or it might be right in the city of Savage, I believe, in the West Metro. And within this AMA, there's actually 9 different subunits. This is a restricted use AMA. It's in a very urban setting, so no hunting or trapping allowed. However, and there's also, as it shows on here, it shows sort of that blue color is what is an AMA owned outright by the state, so it's owned in what we call fee title. But then there's also that purple area. There's a portion of this AMA that's held in easement. So within that easement, there might only be access for angling as the only allowable activity. So make sure you pay attention as you're going through here to see what's allowed and what is not allowed on AMAs. And similar to what Jamie showed before, you can get aerial photography, land cover types, all the same sort of features in the WMA finder that's on the AMA finder as well. So with that, we're going to do a quick pivot here to talk about one of our current projects that we were working on, what we call the WMA AMA System Planning Project. This project was initiated as a need for consistent long-term management planning for the WMA AMA system. We want to make sure that there is very consistent strategic planning that is going on for how we manage these large parcels that are a tremendous resource for the state and for the citizens of the state. So again, we want to make sure that there is a consistent strategy, so that if there's an AMA in one county that's very similar to an AMA in an adjacent county, for example, that there are consistency in how we are making decisions for the management of those properties. Also a desire for increased partner input and local and statewide public involvement in these management planning efforts. We want to hear from the public on, what they view how they use these properties, stories from folks who are utilizing these properties, what they feel is important, really important for how they, the vision that they see for these properties and how they are being used. And not only for recreational purposes, but for habitat purposes as well, and what the public views as habitat, important priorities for habitat. So again, it's creating a statewide framework for managing WMAs more consistently and again, more holistically. So looking at both from a habitat as well as balancing habitat and recreational opportunities. Phase one of this project is to develop sort of an overarching plan across the state for WMAs and AMAs. Much of this work is going to be done internally by DNR staff in collaboration with some partners as well. And that much of this content is being shaped by partner input. We have a group of teams, different project teams that will be meeting and starting to draft some of these different sections that will be shared with the public here once that phase one is completed. Phase two, which will be to develop landscape level plans for each ecological province at group units by ecological section. There'll be extensive local and statewide public engagement opportunities to help guide this work with public input. So there's those QR codes down in the lower right corner that will take you to a link on our Engage DNR site. There's also the link to that URL as well. Right now, we're not into this phase yet where we are actively soliciting and collecting public input. So there's not a lot on this page right now, but if you want to bookmark this page for future use, you'll get, there'll be some updates coming to this page, hopefully in the relatively near future as we start gearing up towards public engagement for this project. So we want to hear stories from the public on how they are using these properties, what they feel is important, really get that input so that we can guide these decisions and be strategic in how we are managing these properties. Jamie, did I miss anything on our WMA AMA system planning? A brief 3-minute update here. Oh, it looks like we lost Jamie.
Am I here?
Yeah, there you are.
No, you did a great job. You covered it all.
So with that, thank you everybody for participating. And I think we'll open it up for any questions folks might have at this point.
All right, great job, you two. Thank you so much for sharing some of that valuable information. I did put another link in there. I know you guys want engagement on the AMAs and WMAs for sure, but there's other engagement opportunities too. So if people are interested in deer management or all-terrain vehicle master plans or any of that stuff too, check out our just general page and look for some of those opportunities out there. So Jason had a question. If anybody else does have questions, please put them in that Q&A section and we will get to those as soon as we can. And if you're ready, Jameson, you can pull that PowerPoint down too. And
yep.
So Jason asked if hunting and viewing are some of the top priority uses for WMAs, is it possible to have more food plots? Is the use of food plots on WMAs seems to be up to the discretion of the area wildlife manager? Is this true?
Yeah, great question about food plots. So historically, food plots have been used to meet a need, right, at the local level. And DNR Wildlife, we've been phasing out our food plot program. We started restricting chemical use, pesticide use, and as part of that, we decided to retire a lot of food plots. And so what did that mean for the wildlife is that we needed to find native ways to meet those needs that were being supplied by the food plots. So we do still have some food plots out on WMAs. They serve a purpose, right? So they serve as food for wildlife, but it's been a process to look at those sites and decide, is there another way that we could provide what's lacking here? And when the answer is, not yet, then the food plot remains. We also use, we use agriculture to help prepare our sites for native restorations or enhancements. And so some people may see a food plot, but we see site prep. And so you might see a temporary, we weren't going to call them a food plot, but temporarily you may see some agricultural fields on WMAs while we are prepping that site for a restoration project. And our restorations can take, 3 to 5 years. And so it's a long process. So hopefully that helps. We encourage people to get out. I find this type of scenario, when I'm the only person, and I should have mentioned in my previous life, I was assistant area wildlife manager in a few different area wildlife offices, and it was a very calming, peaceful place, and a great place for wildlife viewing, especially in the off season outside of hunting. So we don't necessarily need food plots to assist folks in viewing wildlife. We need to get out there, right, and be in nature and be able to see those wildlife. Good question, though.
Yeah, we talk a lot in this program about just the benefits of being outside, both mentally and physically, just getting outside and doing something, be it wildlife watching or foraging or hunting or whatnot. So these are two fantastic areas all across the state, except for just a few counties really that have areas that the general public can just access. So if you have any other questions, please put them in the Q&A there. Tom had one about viewing recordings of the program. He missed the first part. So Tom, if you come back and visit our website at mndnr.gov/discover, all our recordings are posted up there the following week, typically on Monday. So come back and visit us there, look in the archives. Other than that, if anybody else has any other questions. How about, do you guys allow any other activities? I know because every once in a while I cross that great divide of the St. Croix River into the state of Wisconsin over here, and grazing and stuff are options on some of the properties over here. Does Minnesota do that at all across the state?
Yeah, good question, Benji. We do have a grazing program across the state. Obviously, there's a size, a WMA or even an AMA size restriction for active grazing. Currently, we have cattle grazing, so either cow-calf pairs or maybe young of year cattle on some of our larger units. We have agreements with cooperators, so we don't own the cattle and we don't manage the cattle, but we manage the grazing unit. And so we have agreements with the owners of those, the producers. And yeah, we utilize grazing actively. And it can, sometimes we're useful to producers, and sometimes if they're having, not having issues finding forage, or their pastures are producing well, we might not have producers that are interested. But yeah, we have them across the state. And there's I won't be able to find it quickly in time, but if there is a grazing unit on a WMA, you will see a bright like chartreuse sign that has a cow and a calf, and very clearly telling you that there is grazing on that site. And do not open gates.
Great, thank you.
In addition to using it as a management tool, grazing is also common on many of our our trout stream easements, conservation easements. Many of those, that they were purchased many, many years ago, and it allows access for angling only. So one of the options for the landowners is still to have it in production and use it for grazing purposes. So trout stream anglers many of them are very familiar walking along a riparian corridor and seeing cattle along those stream next to them, or being aware of closing gates and how they access the stream and things like that through these easements, and being aware of that the landowners might have active grazing going on in those streams as well.
Yep. So leave it as you found it, hopefully better than you found it if you find any garbage or anything out there. So
yep.
Tom put another question in here. He says he's from the Lessard Sam's Outdoor Heritage Committee, I believe that is. Would you be able to discuss briefly how the Outdoor Heritage Fund interacts with AMA and WMAs?
I would love to. And I'm sure Jameson would love to as well. So the Lessard Sam's Outdoor Heritage Fund is there's a couple different charges. So it's restoration, enhancement, acquisition of lands for public, for the public, and with a like hunting, fishing flair to it, right? So and protection of those lands. And when it comes to WMAs as public lands that are open to the public for hunting, fishing, trapping, those lands are eligible for Outdoor Heritage Fund dollars. And as long as it's a restoration or enhancement of forest, prairie, grasslands, wetlands, or other game and fish habitat, then a project can be eligible. The DNR has some programmatic requests to the Outdoor Heritage Fund annually to fund work, restoration enhancement work on prairies, wetlands, and forests. And we also utilize Outdoor Heritage Funds for acquisitions of WMAs, AMAs, SNAs, scientific and natural areas, state forest land. As long as it's a public land entity that the DNR manages, then it's eligible for the acquisition funding that we get from Outdoor Heritage Fund. And Outdoor Heritage Fund has provided an incredible boost to our WMA system and AMA system. We have high quality habitats. Now we have the ability to go back to some of our oldest WMAs and AMAs that maybe it's just a monoculture, it was a pasture, or and it should have been forest, but there were no funds to develop those lands at the time. We now have the ability to go back and do those projects. We have the ability to acquire lands that have always been outside of our reach, whether it's because of cost or maybe there's a partnership there that needed to be utilized to gain those lands, and now we have that opportunity. Outdoor Heritage Fund is also open for nonprofit, so NGOs, so non-government organizations and governments, but nonprofits. So our partners like Pheasants Forever, Minnesota Deer Hunters, Ducks Unlimited. I mean, I'm not going to keep naming because I will miss a whole lot, but it's endless. The partners that are willing to help us out and manage state lands within the DNR, and not just WMAs and AMAs. And the Outdoor Heritage Fund has provided a source of funding to be able to do that. So we are very blessed here in the state of Minnesota that the Clean Water Land and Legacy Amendment passed, I think 15 years ago, getting close to 2007, 2008. And we nationwide, states look at that model and they're very jealous that we have such enormous support for the outdoors. So another great question.
That question up for us, didn't he, Jamie? I mean, we could do a full presentation on this.
100%, yes. Yeah.
I will add, we also have one sort of under the radar work is a lot of our stream habitat improvement work, especially in Southeast Minnesota, are done on easements, which is funded either through partners such as Trout Unlimited as one example, but also many local government units are doing some of this stream restoration work and using our AMA easements as access and as a protected parcel, permanently protected property, so that not only to gain access, but to conduct that work along the stream and ensure that that riparian corridor remains intact. I used to work in Wisconsin. That was one of the things that drew me coming to Minnesota, is having the opportunity that that the Legacy Amendment provides for this habitat work. And it is many states many other management agencies are quite jealous of the opportunities we have in Minnesota. So we'll try to limit ourselves in this response here.
Thanks to both of you for doing that. It's a fantastic program for sure. So Jesse was wondering, is foraging allowed on WMAs and AMAs?
So foraging is allowed, written into our legislation. It's Everybody, we're very inconsistent, and I'll just throw that out there. So WMA language does not allow for the removal of vegetation from WMAs, except if you're hunting waterfowl and you're using wetland vegetation as a hunting blind. But it does also allow for edible, I'm going to get it right, edible fruits and seeds to be removed for personal consumption. And so right now, officially, fruits and seeds are allowed to be foraged off of WMAs. And but you cannot remove other vegetation. So I'll let Jameson give his spiel, and then we can talk about a project that's going on with regards to foraging across DNR lands.
Yeah, while you were talking, I was trying to pull up our language, but in rule and statute, but I'm not quick enough for that. So yes, it's very similar between WMAs and AMAs. Ironically, within AMA language, it mentions mushrooms as well as a foraging opportunity. It doesn't specifically mention that in WMAs, but it allows for the personal use of fruit, berries, nuts, mushrooms. And similar to WMAs, vegetation cannot be removed without a permit. So you can, I know we have a number of special use permits, say if it's for research purposes or things like that, where we may allow the removal of vegetation under specific circumstances, but that does require a permit. So that to obtain one of those permits, they would need to work with the area fisheries office or the, I'm guessing, area wildlife office for WMA. So yeah, it is. Foraging is an allowed activity in general. Is the simple answer on WMAs and AMAs.
Yeah, and agency wide, we're working at making language consistent because if you look at state forest and you look at state parks and scientific and natural areas, the language around foraging is very different, and there are no definitions of words like what is a fruit? Is it a fruiting body? Is a mushroom a fruit technically? And so we're working actively currently. Jameson and I are both on a committee that are working to further define our needs as far as define what we need to define for the public to make it a lot easier, and then roll that out on a public-facing page to make it accessible to everybody to understand what they can and can't do, or what is allowable and what is not allowable on WMAs, AMAs, and all state lands. So we may not all be on the same page. Scientific and natural areas are very highly specific and very tight in their allowable uses, but WMAs, AMAs, and state parks, for instance, could maybe be on, very consistent about what they provide as opportunities for foraging. So we're actively working on that now, but Jameson and I kind of gave you the official rules, but just the reminder is it's for personal use. There's no commercial foraging that's available.
I think that's a great point. It is for personal use, and the foragers I do know that go out on public land use extreme caution. You're out there as one person collecting, and there's thousands of people that use these areas. So just collect what you're going to use for a day or two, and don't overuse the area. That's, I think, the key part of that. So.
Yeah, correct. And to that point, Benji, thanks for throwing it back out there, is, the core function of a wildlife management area is for production of wildlife, right? So obviously personal use isn't going to impact, if you're collecting a personal use. So again, what does that even mean? Quantity wise of blueberries on a WMA, you're not going to impact the local bear population. So that's why, that's why there's the non-commercial. Because again, we go back to that core function of what these lands were intended to be used for.
Yeah, kind of the thought is that there's a surplus of fruit out there that would be available for harvest beyond, in addition to what it's providing for wildlife.
Jason had a question about the grazing. Are you utilizing grazing for controlling specifically buckthorn, like goats or highland cattle? Do you do any of that?
Yeah, so we do have contracts for invasive species control, and goats are the preferred species. We found really great results, especially on the goat prairies, of the southeast, where it's too steep to do a whole lot mechanically, and they can go in and really make an impact. So yeah, we do short-term contracts and short-term grazing programs with like goats, specifically for buckthorn. I don't know, I couldn't answer specifically on the highland cattle if we have grazing units targeting, that are accessible to cattle just for buckthorn. I'd have to look into that to get back to if you were interested in that one.
I have a daughter that's like obsessed with highland cattle of a buddy of mine. So if I find out they graze blackthorn, my parents may be getting some highland cattle. I don't know.
I've heard that they're a great management tool for that.
That's news to me.
Justification for them. Yep.
Just don't get one.
It's why what I love about this program. I think I learn something new every time I do it. So, John has a great question for a lot of us that love our dogs and our pets and our hunting companions. John's been using WMA areas looking for different wildflowers and different varieties, and he's wondering if it's allowable to have his dog along and unleashed during closed seasons.
I will, for AMAs, I think it's similar to WMAs, quote the specific rule here. A person may not allow livestock, horses, other domestic animals to enter a restricted or general use aquatic management area, except dogs accompanied by or under control of the owner. Dogs must be on a leash from April 16th through July 14th. So, it's that period when there's going to be nesting and other things going on where you want to make sure that the dog's not roaming around and be disturbing those animals during a very sensitive time.
Yep, so that's consistent with wildlife management areas and for all of those reasons that Jameson just listed.
Great. Good answers, you two. And Jason put another question in there. They do like buckthorn, referring to the highland cattle, so I may be in trouble.
You just got a new pet.
All right, if anybody has any other last minute questions, we just have a couple minutes left. I think that was the last one I saw in the Q&A. So any final last comments? I've said it 100 times and I'll say it again. We are super fortunate here to live in the state of Minnesota and have a contingency across the state that is so passionate about the outdoors and having, legacy funding here for some of these activities, and the amount of public access we have to both land and then our Great Lakes and streams that we have across the state is probably a gem between the East Coast and the West Coast that nobody really realizes. We kind of like to keep it that way half the time, but we really enjoy sharing it with our public out there, the citizens across the state of Minnesota. So next week, we're actually talking about a kind of a cool little program, be our 181st episode, but we're talking about collecting seeds for canopies. So people that can go out there and collect seeds, pine cones, whatnot, for the state forest nurseries. So a fun way to get outside and do a little bit of work and help out our natural environment a little bit. So if anybody has any last comments or questions, speak now or forever hold your peace. All right. I think with that, Jamie and Jameson, thank you both for sharing your passion and knowledge about our public lands with us today. And we'll see everybody next week. Get outside, bring somebody with you, and have a great weekend.
Thanks, everybody.